And I see we got a comment already from Portia. Good to interact with you on a somewhat more live manner. She's a frequent commenter to the channel. And yeah, Portia, your garden club being a bit cliquish, that's exactly what I want to talk about today. So that's a problem that, that some of them are going to have, bringing in new members. And it looks like it's already, everybody knows each other, and you're the odd man out, and that can be a real problem. I'm going to go live here with my video as well. So thanks for tuning in today. I appreciate it. This kind of format is new for me. I did one last week. This is my second live stream. And I think the reason I've chosen to do this is that most of my topics I try to be really, really concise if I can. I want to get right to the point. But there are some topics like this one here that bear a little more of a lengthy discussion and perhaps some input from other people who have some views on the same topic. So I'll be checking back to the live stream dashboard occasionally throughout this topic to see if anybody else has anything to add. But first, I guess I should go ahead and introduce myself. So my name is Jason. I'm a professional grower of perennials in a wholesale nursery that ships through Western Canada and the United States. I also have a little farm at home. It's a 3-acre farm on beautiful Nikomin Island. We grow roses, about probably closing in on 200 varieties now. I don't propagate them all, but I do propagate an awful lot of them. And as part of my outreach for what I do with my rose farm here is I speak pretty frequently to garden clubs locally. Last year it was probably 8 or 9 different garden clubs, most of them quite local, although there are a few as far away as, say, Carameus or Bowen Island, or I think I did Squamish last year as well. So all within about a 2 to 3 hour radius of where I live so far. And I've gotten to see quite a few garden clubs. In fact, I was a garden club member before I even got into the industry. So I have some experience being in the garden club scene, and that's why I bring this topic to you, is because I care. I actually think garden clubs are extremely important to not just, I'm going to say, the hobby, but also horticulture in general. It's the voice of the gardener, whereas the horticulture tends to be dominated by the industry, dominated in fact by a few large retailers who are going to put out what they deem the consumer wants. And unless the gardeners speak up, I'm going to make the analogy of the local food movement. I'm going to say that for a long time it looked like, you know, the grocery stores and the big food multinationals could just put whatever on the shelves they wanted to, and we would just buy it based on consumer behavior. But then the organic food movement came in, and the local food movement, and they changed things. They actually convinced these big companies that there was value in listening to the consumer. That's what garden clubs and the garden movement is to the horticulture industry. So I said something in the intro to this topic when I was preparing it. I said that garden clubs aren't failing because they can't find new members. I said they can't find new members because they're failing. And there's a distinction there. I think that people don't want to sign up for a club because the garden club is failing to do something that they want the garden club to do. And I should say this, that not all garden clubs are failing. I've been to garden clubs that are very vibrant and growing, at this time in history. But I do have to clarify that I do think there's a problem. I'm going to go through a couple of online articles here, and give me a second to bring them up. And I'm just going to read through them and briefly peruse them, because you can obviously visit these sites yourself and see what these authors had to say about it. The first one I'm going to talk about here is from a blogger. Sorry, no, this is from the Oregon Association of Nurseries. And they did a little rundown on garden clubs, but I wanted to skip right down to this section here, which says, adapting to the times. There remains a broad concern over decline in garden club membership and participation, whether due to aging leadership, the move to online forums, or other factors. In early 2018, one of the largest garden clubs in Oregon, the Metropolitan Garden Club of Portland, disbanded. Leaders cited declining interest. Okay, so that's a problem. And of course, this article is done somewhat by the industry. So that's their concern, is they're losing a partner. They're losing the garden clubs. They see them as almost like, I think they say in the article, like an informal focus group, but ready for you to use. So they're losing a partner. Let's look at this one here. Is a blogger, I believe it says here Susan Harris, um, and she talks about the decline of species-specific shows. She's talking about the single plant or species-specific societies, things like your local Dahlia Society, your Hemerocallis Society, Rose Society, which I can confirm. There's been a couple of local rose societies that have either declined very much or disbanded. Um, so that's her point here, is that these single species societies were voices for the advancement of the rose or the daylily or the alpine plants, and now they're disappearing, and this can be a massive problem. And I guess I would agree with her general point that I think the species-specific plant societies may have been hit the hardest by the decline in garden clubs. I have one more article to show you here. And this one is, oh boy, what a racy picture to start with. This is from the Dallas Morning News from a few years back, I think probably 5 years back. And they're talking again about the decline and the history of garden clubs in America and how the demographics have changed. And I would let you read the whole thing, but the point they make in the end here is a couple of directions going forward. Turnaround tale, they say here, about one society that just, actually had a force of nature personality come in and take over and bring back that enrollment. And as far as strategies to improve your garden club, that's a great one. I've met some of these people who are this like force of nature, just like very attract all the attention in the room and really get things to happen. But as far as a strategy goes, it's not one that you can count on very much. It's not one that I would suggest that most garden clubs adopt. The next one here, they talk about another garden club, they say, has really banded together with other garden clubs to do action in their community to make themselves more relevant. And that's something I think that any garden club can do. So I'm going to go back here now and go through some topics that I prepared on this. And I guess the first thing I'd say, going back to that statement, garden clubs aren't failing because they can't find new members. They can't find new members because they're failing. And I wanted to illustrate this by making an example, sort of a make-believe example. So imagine along with me here that you are a brand new gardener. And frankly, this is something I'm interested to know, is if you don't mind, pop into the chat box beside the window here. And if you don't mind telling me, do you call yourself a beginner gardener? Do you call yourself an intermediate gardener? Do you call yourself an advanced gardener? I'd like to know that. I sort of have an idea of who my viewers are, I think, but maybe you can surprise me a little bit. So back to my example, imagine you're a brand new gardener who has found the hobby, and this could happen at any age. Typically, we think it happens a little bit later, like 50s and 60s, but it can happen to a 30-year-old, I suppose. So imagine you're that brand new gardener. You've found a YouTube channel you like, or you've found a book, or you've gone to the garden center and had some success planting some things, and you want to take that next step into the hobby. So you think, well, I've heard of garden clubs. Maybe I'd like to engage with one of those. So you go looking for your local garden club, and probably you Google it. You say, what are the local garden clubs around Mission or Abbotsford or wherever you're from? And you find that there is a listing on a static website somewhere way buried back on the internet. Looks like it has been changed since like 1986. Because you can sometimes tell these things when you look at a website. And basically all it tells you is, yes, we're a garden club. We meet on the second Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. at the Rotary Hall. And you go, okay, and how do I interact with you in the meantime? And so you go on the Facebook and you see if they have a page. And most clubs at one point or another have taken a kind of a half-assed effort to throw up a Facebook page. Some of them are really good, but in general, let's just say for this example that what you find is a basically inactive Facebook page, fan page of this garden club, no discussion on there. So you go, well, okay, maybe I'll show up at this defined meeting. Now, let me clarify here that if you're that person, that makes you an oddball or unusual. I think most people, this has been the experience of garden clubs, most garden clubs don't find new members just walking in off the street based on that listing. It just doesn't happen that much. So if you're that new gardener and you've decided to attend and you show up to that meeting, congratulations, you're more persistent than most. Because I think that most garden clubs do kind of a terrible job of outreaching to the community. But that said, let's say you've now arrived at this garden club and it's at the Rotary Hall. It's kind of a rundown place, whatever. You walk in, you hear some clanking behind the scenes. Sounds like somebody's making some coffee or cutting up some carrot cake or something like that. There's a book laid out on the table at the front that's a sign-in book. You don't know what to do. You didn't know whether you should bring a fee either. Like it said, admission fee or annual membership fee, $15. You had that in your back pocket. You didn't know whether you should bring it or not. You sign into the book and you take a seat. The seats are already out, so that's great. Nobody else really around that much. And then they start to filter in. And they all seem to know each other, which is kind of what you feared. It can be a little bit intimidating going to a new group of people and trying to, just show up. And, nobody really glances your way or talks to you that much. And you're kind of feeling like, okay, well, I'll wait until the meeting starts. I'm not, I have no great need to be the center of attention. So you wait there. And eventually they convene the meeting. So somebody takes the mic, and this is the president of the club. And she may or may not have a gavel, okay? So at this point, she calls the meeting to order. And she says, first, let's talk about the meeting agenda. And starts to go through this agenda of things you have to do. And then she says, okay, can I have an approval of the agenda? And you're like, approve the agenda? And people start raising their hands and voting. You're like, oh, okay, I guess they vote on what they want to talk about, right? Then she hands over the microphone to the treasurer. And the treasurer starts going through the financials and the financial report of the organization, starts going through how much money they made at the local plant sale, how much money they made from concessions, so on and so forth. Here's an update on the books. Okay, here's where we're at. We're in good shape. Fantastic. Okay, can we have a vote to approve the treasurer's report? And they start voting again. Okay, so 10 minutes in, gets handed over to the secretary. The secretary starts reading over something called the minutes from the last meeting and basically repeating everything that would have been said in the last meeting, but now you're voting on it. Okay, fantastic. And then they proceed into business, the business of the club. And the business of the club consists of a lot of stuff like who's volunteering for what, who's setting up for the plant sale, who's running what committee, who's doing all this stuff. And they spend 15, 20 minutes just going over their business. And in the meantime, you're sitting there rather confused because you thought this was a plant club or a garden club. Finally, the president takes the thing again, the mic again, and says, okay, time for a break. Okay. So now you're taking a 15-minute break with these people you don't know. You do shake a few hands, you say hello, and you sit down. And finally, the part of the club that you're interested in, a speaker comes on. And you find the speaker, well, hang on, let's not just pretend you're the attendee now. Let's pretend you're me and I'm the speaker. So now I'm the speaker at this meeting. I have two thoughts immediately, actually, two thoughts. One, worst warm-up ever. Wow. I'm going to have to pull at the paddles to resuscitate this crowd. And second is that if I were a new member, I would run for the hills in that first coffee break. But assuming this new person sticks around for the talk portion of the meeting, uh, and now you're very impressed by the speaker. The garden club speaker is exciting, interesting, engaging, and you're like, wow, this is awesome. So they finish up. There's a few questions, and you're like raring to go. Your excitement is up, and you're like, okay, great. Now we're gonna have some lively discussion. No, it's time for the raffle. So now they're doing the raffle table. They do a little bit of show and tell, and given that the general age of the club is a little on the higher side, they want to get to bed on time. It's closing in on 9 o'clock now, so meeting adjourned. And you go home, you know, having had somewhat of good experience, but also going, what happens now? I don't see these people until next month, if at all. So, you know, that outreach end is very poor, and then the cultivating a part of the community, getting that person to feel like they're a part of your community, getting to feel like they're included, they're accepted, is also very poor. So I want to go back now and just talk about some of the things that I think are essential functions of a garden club, because I think in that example, the garden club has actually failed to do so to some degree. And I'm just putting up a graphic here now that talks about what I view as the essential roles of a garden club. So that first one was outreach, how you reach new members. It's part of your job to find new gardeners and include them in your club and to make them feel welcome. And if you're cliquey, like Portia said, or if you don't do a good job of welcoming those new members, that could be really rough. I once attended, just a brief aside, a bee club society out in Langley, and it was a very, very busy room, not a big room, and eventually the chairs all filled up, and then there was standing room only. There was a speaker, and I was thinking, oh my, this club is doing something right. And one of those said forces of personality took the speaker, but she didn't go on to club business. The first thing she did is said, I see some new faces around the room here. Who are you? And went one by one through the new people who were there and talked to them like real people, talked to them to connect them to her community. And I thought, well, that's how they're doing it. They're making people feel like they could connect and belong to the club. So that outreach is part of something you need to do. And I'm going to say a little more about outreach here is that the reason why those 3-line ads in the back of a newspaper or the static website ever worked, ever got people to attend a garden club, if to the degree that they ever did, is only because there was a lack of better alternatives. So honestly, now there's things like Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and other social media connections, but one of these is ahead when it comes to local engagement, and that's Facebook. So Facebook discussion groups on gardening have gotten very, very popular. And I don't think that most garden clubs have taken advantage of this very well. Some have. And I want to give you an example here of a local garden club called the Valley Permaculture Guild, which I think is a clever name, actually, to call it a guild instead of a club, because permaculture is all about the guilds. For those of you who don't know permaculture, it's a system of agriculture or gardening that focuses on trees, shrubs, perennials, and permanent plantings more so than just annual monoculture crops. And it usually encourages the interplanting of a bunch of these species. And you can put in vines and root crops. But the theory is that permaculture makes these things grow better together or make a more sustainable garden together. I think it's a fantastic thing. So for a while, I was interested in joining the local club, but time-wise, I was having a little trouble making that happen. So I checked out their website and I saw they had a Facebook page. So I said, well, at least I'll go and try to connect with them. And I joined their Facebook page thinking, well, at the time, this was a few years back, I didn't know that they would even accept outside people or people who were not members of their club, but they did. And it looked like they were pretty routine about letting people from the local community join their Facebook engagement rather than just focusing on the club. Today, update, I think they have about 1,400 members on their Facebook discussion group. And granted, some of this is pretty surface level stuff that they're discussing. Here's a gardening meme, here's a joke, but some of it is real information about permaculture, and that's the way you engage your community right up front. Another group that I know of locally here, I had a guy on my channel a while back. He did a lighting video with me, and he runs a gardening club group, Facebook group here regionally. And I don't think he'd want me to mention the name because he doesn't want members from all around the world just popping in and making membership requests, because that can be a little bit awkward for running a local club. But I think it has something like 8,000 local members. Now, if you're a gardening club and you're thinking, how would having 8,000 members in a discussion group that I have access to in my club affect the way that I run the business of my club? It would be amazing. You'd have that much access to all those people. You're onboarding and outreach. And people go to those groups and they engage right away. They start talking. Oh, thanks for joining, adding me to the group. I have this problem with this shrub in my front yard, and it's this between meetings, right? So I think I've heard people say, oh man, we're a garden club and these online groups, they're stealing our thunder. And I think you've got it all wrong, buddy. They're not stealing your thunder. They are your thunder, right? Because the people joining up together in a garden club, that's the spark. That's the exciting thing. That's the lightning, right? The reverberation throughout the community, that loud sound they can make, that lasts quite a bit longer between those meetings, that's the discussion groups on Facebook. And I wanted to say once again, if you're not a Facebook fan, well, I'm sorry. I know I'm spending some time talking about it here. It just happens to be the local format that has caught on, right? They're good at it. They've made these discussion groups and lots of people have joined. It could be a different one 10 years in the future. I'm not concerned with that. I'm just saying right now, today, if you have a garden club and you don't have your own active discussion group, you better get on that. And maybe a shortcut for you would be to look at what local gardening discussion groups there are, and don't try to build it from the ground up, but just join in with that one and start sneaking in your garden club business there, when you're having meetings and so on. Most of the local garden clubs, discussion groups on Facebook are very receptive to that sort of thing. I mean, it gives them, you have something they don't have, they have something you don't have. They have a whole bunch of members who are casually interacting with each other between meetings, but they don't have physical meetings and they don't have the capacity to do so. So that's the thinking you have to go here, is it's a partnership that could work for both parties. So I want to just really quickly, before I continue on here, just go back to the live stream panel and see if there's any discussion so far. Oh boy, there is, which makes me very happy. I mean, it would be really lazy of me to do a live stream, or useless to do a live stream like this and then not have your discussion be a part of it. So give me a second here to just browse through and see what people have to say. Yeah, okay. So David McCutcheon, I've made this point before, is that the Rose Society seem to be dominated by the exhibitors. And yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. The outreach portion, the Vancouver Rose Society did a good job, and they had their rose show on a couple of years back, and I think they're doing one again this year. But they invited me there as a speaker, and they made a point of using the exhibit to then pull people in and have talks and discussions and try to introduce them to the hobby, right? Which I thought was actually quite clever. So I don't think one's exclusive of the other, but I think that some clubs can get the balance wrong. Yeah, for Applewood Acres there, having a club where you are 48 and 55 and you're the youngest, that's not unusual. I mean, certainly the more in my local area, the more I go to an area where there's suburban and land available for gardening, there's more young people involved. And the more urban I go into Vancouver, where the property prices are outrageous, usually the average age of the person in that group goes way, way up. And I've spoken to at least one club where I read the room as probably an average age of 70, 75 years old. And the only young person there, I was excited. I saw a young person there. Turned out she was a care aide for one of the attendees. So it dashed my hopes. But no, it's 100% true. But the point of my video here is that some groups are doing this really, really well and are attracting young people or younger people, given that the average age of people getting into gardening is a little bit later, but some clubs are doing that. So if this were just a demographic thing, young people aren't interested, then I could accept that. But some clubs are doing well and some clubs are doing poorly, attracting younger members. And so there's definitely things you can do. And I think if you follow what I've put up on the screen here, that way, as the essential rules of garden club, if you do them well, you can probably do a better job of attracting younger members. Certainly, they won't live with the same old, same old. Yeah, Salon Girl Gardens, same deal. You know, a little depressing, and you make the point of them not embracing new technology. Yeah, absolutely. I mean that Facebook thing is just, you know, you got to do it. People aren't going to accept the old way where you go in for a club, it's run in a very, you know, formal fashion, and then you walk away and there's no connection with them for another month. That's a recipe for disengagement. Yeah, Applewood Acres, having them be open-minded and talk about things that are topical. I will go into that in just a second here. Wow, some great comments in here. Okay, now Karen, is it Dupe or Dupe? I just wanted to mention the choice of time of meeting can actually be a thing, you know. So if you that's part of your outreach and that's part of making your club attractive to people. If you're going meeting at 1 in the afternoon on a weekday, like, you know, you're basically got retired people. And, you know, in some areas, I attended Bowen Island and it was a weekday meeting and it was very busy, but that's Bowen Island. So they're kind of an odd bunch there. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's actually a very positive thing, but it's a little more affluent and there are some younger retired people in that community. So, but yeah, you bet. Um, so I'm going to go back now to my topic and move on because I've been talking about outreach for a while now. And I want to talk about the second part, which is teach. And I think most garden clubs get it when it comes to teaching. They usually will bring in a garden club speaker. For some of the larger clubs, smaller clubs may not be able to get that every time. But you'll usually bring in a garden club speaker who will talk about something exciting or interesting, at least if they choose the speaker well. But, and they also sometimes run little question and answer periods amongst their own members. It doesn't have to be a speaker. It can be their own members who, you know, I remember the Chilliwack Garden Club had, you know, Ask Jack, which was fantastic. God rest his soul. But it was, you know, so they can manage this. But my problem is, and this is I guess maybe the rantiest portion of my talk here, is that if you've been overly administrative in the way that you construct your society, you rob away the opportunity to teach. So in the for instance that I gave at the beginning, where they're pulling out a gavel and they're, you know, recognizing the president and recognizing the vice president and treasurer and secretary, uh, you know, that's first of all a giant time waster. Like, you're going to use that time to do club business rather than teach people and engage people in your topics. That's like, wow, what a wasted opportunity. But second of all, it's going to turn people off. Like, they're not going to want to be part of a club that's that administrative. So, you know, it does take away from it. And I did want to say a couple of words about that format and why it exists in garden clubs. And it doesn't exist everywhere. So I've seen phenomenal garden clubs that run in a very, very casual way, still meet all of our provincial requirements for being a nonprofit society, but they just take their club business amongst the executive, that's what you call the president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, and they put it into a separate meeting. And they have, the executive meeting, which, they do over the phone on a Saturday or whatever, uh, and they meet their requirements of their own bylaws. And then the public facing meetings, the ones where, new members might attend or where you have the speaker, they don't talk about that business. In fact, some clubs are so good at the social media thing that they do their club business on Facebook. They do, who's going to volunteer for this, who's bringing the cookies, who's doing coffee, where are we going to meet? All that type of stuff happens in business. So it isn't an absolute necessity that you run your club like a business organization, or Robert's Rules of Order are not mandatory here. That said, there is some advantage in some jurisdictions, and you're gonna have to check this yourself, about having, if you're gonna hold money as an organization, if you wanna be a nonprofit, if you wanna have tax-free status, if you want to be able to apply for grants or subsidies from your local government or from your state, lottery funds or whatever, then you're gonna have to meet some of these requirements. And in my local area, the requirement is that you have to have, the executive has to exist, they have to follow the bylaws, and they have to file one AGM report every year. And that's it. They don't have to do anything else. There's even a less involved kind of structure that you can use called member-funded societies here in BC, that the requirements are negligible, as long as you're not accepting money from outside sources. So, your administrative burden may vary from state to state, province to province, if you want to accept some of that outside money. But please, please, please do everything you can to take that business portion of it and separate it out from the public-facing portion of your meetings. I think it can be done in most places, unless your bylaws were written kind of funky. And I will say one other thing is that when I talk about casual garden clubs, I mean, a garden club can be as easy as a few interested people rotating through each other's houses and meeting in each other's gardens and walking around, and they don't have to have a formalized speaker. They can just be people talking to each other, which is, perfectly fine and fantastic, actually. One of the best garden clubs I ever attended was exactly that format. So I guess what I'd say is most garden clubs do get it, that their role is to inform and their role is to educate. And most of them will, do that to a certain extent, but some of that administrative burden can get in the way of that. Just going to go back to the comments here for just a second. Yeah, okay, Ellie Bosch, I'm going to talk to you for a second here, because you say, what's the point of garden clubs? What do they hope to achieve? And I'm moving on to that right now, because I say, outreach is one function, teach is another function, but it's the function of advocating an action that really make garden clubs relevant. And I'm going to go back and do another article here for just a second. You guys are going to think I'm weird, because I'm reading you an article that is, hang on. I'm reading you an article that's about church. And I won't read the whole thing. I think he makes some great points, but they could apply. If you have a little imagination, you can apply all of this directly to the garden club scene. And he's a good, convincing author. So I'm not trying to indoctrinate you to any particular religious belief here. I just think that it's relevant. So he says, "Dear church, the exodus has begun. It's not going to stop. People are leaving you, and they're probably not coming back. I know you're panicking, scrambling to understand it all, trying to somehow stop the bleeding, reverse the swift and steady tide out of the doors. You hire consultants and hold emergency meetings and plan bold strategies and brainstorm solutions, all designed to engineer a way to bring the prodigals home, to reach the young people," that applies to us, "to grow numerically again. I know you imagine that if you just tweak the songs or shorten the service or get a new sign or rebrand your logo or set up shop in a strip mall, that if you find just the right aesthetic balance of vintage reverence and hipster chic, This will all magically change your fortunes, and it won't. So he goes on to say, and I don't want to read the whole thing here. There's some things in this I agree with and some things I don't agree with necessarily, but uh, he says they don't give a damn about such things, about these little petty changes. Church, people are leaving you because you're silent now in ways that matter to them. You aren't saying what they need you to say and what you should be saying, and it makes them sick. And in this case, he's talking about the moral center of being a church, talking about human atrocities and cruelty and hypocrisy, and that you should have the courage to say those things. And I'm going to skip down a little bit here to say, I know you're worried about saying too much, about being branded too political, about offending people or somehow making it worse by speaking. Trust me, you're making it worse by saying nothing. Now, he goes on to talk a little bit about his uh, his values and what he talks about in his sermons. And this is the part where I think he loses the plot a little bit. He talks about, that you need to, in his case, stand against conservatism in America and so on, because he's a little bit on that progressive identity politics side himself, or at least that's the way I read him. And not that I agree with all of his politics, but he's right on this, is to say, if you want to be relevant again, say everything. Stand on your platforms in your pulpit and specifically name the politics, unequivocally condemn people and policies and things that you're against. Stop couching your words and softening your delivery and start speaking with clarity about what matters to you. That's what those who are leaving want the most. And it may be too late to stop the exodus at this point, but saying everything will at least help you to keep your soul as you fade away. At least you'll know you stood for something. So great article. And like I say, I don't agree with every point in it because, I don't think it's about specifically what you're saying. It's about that don't be afraid to say it. And I'm just going to go back to my notes here. And there are things in the gardening community that matter to us, things that are issues that matter to people in gardening. And I'm going to go through a quick list here, and you tell me, are some of these things controversial? Pesticide use, or herbicide use, and things like that. So environmental concerns. Parks and public spaces, should again, that's something that gardeners care about. You can talk to your local council about, how they're actually doing what they do. Invasive species, zoning and local regulation. I know not everybody here is a chicken person, but local uh, a lot of local councils have problems with, they don't have a policy on having people be able to have chickens. They also don't have policies. Some places have policies where you can't grow your front lawn a certain way, where it has to be just mowed grass. That's it. You can't have it too high or have wildflowers or anything else. And those are gardening topics. Food security is another one that people in our community care about. And one of my pet issues is the transformation of plants into disposable consumer items. I mean, I know this trend has been coming a long time, but the fact that you grow poinsettias and spray some glitter on them and put them in a store, you sell them, they live for a little while, and then they're meant to be thrown in the trash. A lot of the newer succulent planters sort of fall in the same category-ish. But to me, the gardening industry moving more aggressively into the space of disposable items is a travesty. Well, who's going to say that? You're the voice of gardeners against global horticulture. And I'm not saying against, like, we hate them. I mean, I'm certainly work for a gardening organization or a horticultural organization. But the point being that garden clubs have to have a voice on these things. And like John Pavlovitz was saying in that article, are you afraid that if you say something too contentious, that the whole meeting is going to erupt into a series of people shouting at each other over these things? Are you worried that the old people will be turned off by talking about environmental concerns? What are you worried about? Because ideally, we can talk to each other about these things. And even if we don't agree with each other, but if you can foster that in your garden club where you can talk about these important issues to gardeners, I guarantee you, just by definition, you must get you must get more engagement by your attendees. That will definitely happen. And I know again that some of those Facebook garden clubs do moderate. They do sort of slow down and stop when somebody goes too far off on, I hate everybody who uses, I hate Monsanto or Bayer crop science, or and that can be disruptive, but that's uh, the art and craft of being a moderator, is that you can rein that back in, still let people feel like they're heard, but then say, okay, and once we hit this point, then we move on. And sometimes maybe we even hear a counterpoint, and that's okay too. So don't be afraid to stand for something. Don't be afraid to talk about something. Get that back into your clubs. Don't just be the dry, we're here to do our business, and then we hear the speaker, then we go home. Okay, that's all we do, which can be, quite annoying to a guy like me. Sorry, I'm going to see if I can put back up that rules of the garden club graphic here. So I've already been through outreach, I've already been through teach, I've already been through advocate, and finally I want to talk about action. And by action, I say this: it's all fine and good to teach and advocate, but you can do all of that online. Really. Most of these conversations can be had online. The one thing that you can do as a garden club that meets in person is actually do stuff. You can exchange seeds, you can take cuttings, you can have gleaning events. And so when the harvest is out and people have apples in their yard or an apple tree in their yard that they don't care to harvest, your club can glean those and use those for other things. You can get involved in community gardens. You can involve, there's there's a horticultural event we use a lot here in Canada called Seedy Saturday, which is basically a large seed exchange and more or less a fundraiser for Seeds of Diversity, which is an organization that does some good stuff. And a lot of garden clubs partner up with them in those Seedy Saturday events, but also any other local community plant sales. We have a big one in Chilliwack called the Gwyn Vaughan Plant Sale, or Gwyn Vaughan Park Plant Sale, where a lot of the garden clubs show up. Communities in Bloom, again, I might just be another Canadian thing, but Communities in Bloom is like an organization where they encourage these nonprofits to come together and try to pretty up your community and make it look really nice. And then they have a little competition and it's judged and they figure out which is the nicest community, which I'm not so big on the status and judged thing, but if it's a way to get people interested. But doing a flower show or an exhibition, well, that's action too. I'm with you that I don't think that should be the only focus of your garden club. But it is action, and it can bring people to that next level of understanding plants if they have to look at, well, what stage is the bud in when you cut this, and how do you preserve it for cutting and that kind of thing. It's another part of the hobby, right? I don't say anything shouldn't be a part of the hobby. I just say you've got to focus on the things that are action, right? Workshops. I was thinking, man, the garden centers put on these workshops, and whenever they do like a hanging basket workshop or they do something like that, the place is full up. Garden clubs can do exactly that. You can work together to get the plugs, and put on a workshop where everybody works together to build a hanging basket, and that would be that would attract a lot of people who are new to the hobby and just need somebody to walk them through it as they do their own hanging baskets. Open gardens where people do tours of their gardens. That's community action as well. And lobbying and bringing your concerns forward to government. And again, I don't expect that everybody in every garden club is going to agree on every issue, but once you do have a philosophical understanding of each other, and if something matters to you, then translating that to action means going to your local city council and demanding or asking that they change the policies about what you can grow in your front yard, or how they allocate or plant local community gardening space. So that's part of your role as taking action in the community. So I have that's pretty much it for the scripted or at least outlined portion of my conversation. I have one other thing to say, which is that I think that these online garden clubs can form the nice foundation for like on the Facebook garden clubs could form a nice foundation for what you do, and you know, once you build that community, you can do something with it. So I have actually a while back I created a worldwide Unruly Rose Society on Facebook. So if anybody's interested in doing that, there will be no carrot cake. There will be no coffee service. There are no rules. I'm not going to take minutes. I'm not going to have a gavel. You know, anybody can join, and you can say whatever you want. It's a bit of an anarchist society because we're talking about roses that don't behave, and if you want to, just as your token of membership, come on in and post a picture of any rose in your garden that isn't behaving well, that is kind of unruly or acts badly amongst his neighbors. And now that's not mandatory. Okay, there are no rules, so you can join even without that. So I want to go back now, just really quickly, because everybody's been listening so nicely, and I appreciate it. I want to go back now and just go quickly through uh, the comments that people have left here, and then uh, af after that, I'm going to say goodbye, but I really, really hope that if you've watched this, or even if you haven't watched this, that you're catching it later online, that you can use the comment section below the video. I mean, the chat section only stays open during the video, but after that, the comments down below. And if you've gotten any value from what I've said here, because this is supposed to be a conversation, then take the link after it's posted, after I've put the subtitles on, after it's all ready, and take that and just forward it to your local garden club, right? And they may like me for it, they may dislike me for it, but if they, either way, they can come back onto YouTube and they can make comments down below the video about what they do to succeed or what they think I'm wrong about. That's totally fine. So I'm just going to go back up here a little ways. And California Backyard Orchard says it's difficult to hold or attend club meetings due to traffic and distance, and most good clubs are sorry, that online clubs are the norm out here. And yeah, I think that's sort of the way it's going. I think there's room for both things, that you have online clubs for times when it's impractical to meet, and for the ongoing interaction, and that even if you have a mostly online club, that there's room in there for a meetup. There's room in there for, at certain points, once you've got enough members, that you can get together and have a little luncheon or whatever. And not all of this has to be like like I say, let's follow the structure of a big nonprofit organization. That's just an informal thing. That's an informal us meeting each other about gardening topics, and that's the core of a gardening club. Just going on here, and Winter Lily 10, you'll be looking into your local garden clubs this spring, and good luck. I hope you find one that suits you well, and if you do, you know, I hope you stick around to make the changes and modernize them and help them along the way. Uh, uh, Mary says the Bonsai Club votes in the new year on topics at the last meeting of the year to include topics, speakers, disease issues, winter prep pots, rocks, sharpening tools, and dues collection for the year. And you know, I think there is a place for club business, and most clubs will hold an annual general meeting. This one sounds sort of that sort, where you just once a year sort of take care of all the business of electing officers, getting everything on the record, so that you can accept those public funds, that you can manage your books and be accountable to the members. But then hopefully what you do after that is you say, okay, we got that out of our system. And our next meeting, we're just going to focus on having fun, interacting with each other, providing information, running a seminar, having a speaker, you know, the parts that really provide high value to members. Portia, yes, unpassionate people waste a lot of gardeners' time. And yeah, I agree with you. You can tell from what I'm saying here, I'd rather see a group of people who are a little bit disorderly, but at least are saying what they mean about gardening and engaging each other in the topics that matter. I mean, be nice, you know, get along with everybody, but yeah, that's the point of it. And all right, I've got enough here now. I'm going to thank you so much for watching today. I know this is run, I'm just looking here, oh, probably in the range of 45 or 50 minutes. So I know that's a little longer than I would normally do. But for a topic like this, I don't mind that. It's a little more of an informal format. And I really do appreciate all of you who stuck around and made some comments and added to the conversation. So thanks so much. All right, that should be it. I'm